Professor Margaret Ch Zama from the Department of English, Mizoram University. Right now I am speaking to you all from our departmental library, which had been funded by DRS SAP I, which I will be talking about a little later. We have almost 2,000 books in our library here, in this departmental library. Under DRS I, we had bought 900, a little over 900 books we had procured. Other than that, over 300 to 400 books have been donated by faculty, but also by visiting senior Fulbright fellows. 3 of them had come from United States at different points in time in the past 5 to 8 years. So the collection has grown to almost 2,000 now. What I want to talk about first of all at the onset is, what is this DRS SAP that we are talking about? UGC has this program in which it supports us. So let me put it this way, we are right now under the DRS SAP, and DRS stands for Departmental Research Support, and SAP stands for Special Assistance Program. So we have just completed our DRS 1 phase of 5 years, and now we are on to our DRS 2 phase. In fact, I would say we started DRS 1 from the year 2011 and completed our 5-year tenure in 2016 March, of which I was coordinator for the 5 years, and Dr. Lalrindiki Tifanai was the co-coordinator. Now, after a small break of almost 2 years and applying for our DRS 2 stage, we have been granted this, which came into effect from April 2018. The coordinator this time is Professor Margaret Ch, who is also currently our head of department, and the co-coordinator is Professor K.C. Larikamwani. If we are fortunate, our vision is, under this DRS SAP program, we move on to the level of what is called the Department of Financial Assistance, DSA. And if we do our work well, as our record has been good so far, we can actually envision and dream of being a Center for Advanced Study, CAS, Center for Advanced Study, under this DRS SAP program. Now, UGC supports for about 3 terms, after which we are supposed to start being independent on our own. And once we reach this Center for Advanced Study status, it opens up a lot of doors, not only for the department and faculty and students and research scholars, but actually for the whole of the university. It brings in, status, good name and funding, and so on and so forth. So we are very keen to actually continue this program, and in fact this very talk that I am giving is very much part of the DRS 2 program. So having said that as a kind of introduction to what this project is all about, DRS SAP, I have to talk a little bit about DRS 1. Very briefly I will talk about it, because we have to mention our achievements during the 5-year term that we had from 2011 to 2016, and the fact that the present DRS 2 phase is a continuum of the first one. Now, our first project was the first project proposal that we submitted was called Emerging Literatures from Northeast India. And this DRS2 for the next 5 years, we have entitled it Situating the Mizo / Zohnahthlak in Mizoram and Manipur, a study of the historical and socio-cultural processes of emergent identities from orality to writing. So this is going to bring in a lot of several other related issues during my talk. First of all, I want to just talk about how this project was initiated, what were the objectives, and then briefly about the achievements. So, you know, when we talk about emerging literatures from Northeast, it isn't that these are suddenly newborn writings. No, they have existed, especially in states like Assam, Manipur, Tripura. They have had a long history of literature, as it were, but most of it written in their vernacular and then translated also, and now several writers, poets, they are writing in English as well. But what about the hilly regions and the tribal communities in Arunachal, in Nagaland, in Meghalaya, Garo Hills, and in Manipur also, and in Mizoram, and in Sikkim? So, in DRS1, although we did not include the Sikkim component, what we are talking about right now is, when we say emerging, the writings the literature that were written in the vernacular are now beginning to come out in translations of different Indian languages, but particularly we are concerned with the translations in English. This is very important. And then also number 2, we are going to see how the writers writing in English are also now growing in size, and the kind of wonderful works that they are doing, which is bringing laurels for the region by way of getting several national prestigious awards, recognition at home and abroad, being widely published, and so on and so forth. So I want to touch on this. Now, this emerging literature that is written both in English and the vernacular, it involves a very, very important component, that is translation. Translation, and in fact, later on I'll talk about how we have given cognizance to this by introducing translation studies also into our course for the postgraduate. So it involves translation works, and it also involves networking with key resource persons and writers spread across the Northeast region, that is spread across our sister states. It isn't that we are doing work and project that is insular or very, very regional or particular to Mizoram alone. No. Now, so this emerging literature that we are talking about in DRS1 in the first phase, emerging literatures from Northeast, is very, very multi-voiced, I would say, varied and very rich. Different voices. And this study also necessitates the study and research into the oral tradition component. By this, what I mean is the folk tales and folkloristics belonging to not only the Mizo and the sub-clans under Mizo, but also the development and growth of the literary genre in its writing form that we see today. How did it develop? And this is what DRS2 will take care of also. So, you know, the development of literary genre forms, which gives rise to and generates an interesting field for literature, culture, interface and study. This is what we have aimed at, and we continue to, generating this interesting field of study, literature-culture interface studies, not only for individual state, as I said, like Mizoram, but also for comparative studies amongst the different states in the region. Now over here, our findings, the findings for all of this so far has been possible because we documented. That is, the documentation portion is very, very important. So you see, the first objective is the documentation part, and then translation comes, and then the publication of our research works that have emerged. So first of all, it is the documentation, the collection, and then comes the translation, and then comes the publication of our findings and of our research works, of our translations, of this very important emerging literatures and writings that are coming out of the region, particularly from our state. So findings for all of this, as far as possible, has been documented, and it has been documented through published research articles and also through chapters written in books and through our writings and translations that we have published in several volumes. And in fact, most of our own published works are also housed in this library here, and also being used as a growing corpus for research material. Now, when we are going to talk about this when we aimed to do this project, we were very, very aware of two main influences of our literary formation, which I will talk about in more detail a little later. And that is, first of all, comes the mainstream influence. That is the mainstream influence as well as that of the Western culture. I'll talk about it in detail a little later. And then, of course, religion, education, and globalization today. So these things have contributed to the formation of our literary forms today, whether we are writing fiction or whether we are writing poetry or prose. Now, the other very, very strong influence is the oral tradition, or shall we say, the culture of remembrance, the culture of memory. It is also called Nimo culture. This is important because a community, particularly a community like ours, who have had our oral traditions for so long, we find and develop our own literary idioms. And this is important because we have to find that, in other words, we have to find our own voice. And this is what this project has done and continues to do. What is this, finding our own voice? So that we can articulate our voice and cultural rootedness. Surely our voice and cultural rootedness differs from state to state, from nation to nation, across the globe. So we want to also revisit this, as it were, revive whatever it is we have, and bring it out for others to learn and to know about us. So I'll just mention again that the two influences, one is that of the mainstream and Western culture influence, globalization, religion, education, and the other one is the culture of memory, or Nimo culture, as I said, which induces us to find and to develop our own voice, because that is something that is our own literary idiom that we develop, and articulating our own voice and cultural rootedness. The manner in which we Mizos may express something, the same thing, the manner in which the Khasis or the Nagas will express need not necessarily be the same. So you see, this development and articulating of our own voice and that particular literary idiom that we have is very important. So this project of ours, which is now in its second phase, we feel is very important, and we feel we are making quite a big contribution here. Now, here obviously it is oral traditions and orators that play a key role. Our oral traditions and our orators. And when I say oral traditions, obviously it would be our songs, our riddles, our stories, our games, our wise sayings, so many things that we have as part of our oral tradition. And it plays a key role because all of it comes along now. This is the area where research becomes so important. All of this actually comes along with a larger burden. And when I say, I'll use the word without offense, that is the post-colonial baggage. I call it the post-colonial baggage. Because in this day and age now, and with the kind of education and exposure that we have had in these regions, in the hills, not only Mizoram but rest of the northeast region, there is a lot of post-colonial baggage because, and this is actually taken care of in the phase 2 also. By this, what I simply mean is, identity issues, for example. Identity issues, politics of interpretation of texts and cultures. How does the other interpret us or for us, and how do we interpret? There's a lot of politics of interpretation involved there of our texts and cultures. And then also, hidden fears and often also resentment at times of the other. The inside and the outsider, the insider, the outsider binary. Like it or not, despite globalization and liberalism, this remains. Why? Because, you see, in a way, we remember that culture of remembrance, memory that I spoke about just now. We remember our history. We remember the historicity of the issues that arise, claims made by our history. So the fear of losing out, when we talk about identity, it cannot just be what we are today, but what we were, and what we were has resulted in the formation of what we are today. So in this sense, this DRS-1 that I was talking about had been initiated keeping these things in mind, and the fact that a lot of good literature is coming out of this region in the vernacular and in English, and people in the rest of the world and rest of the country need to hear about us and not just see us as anthropological studies, or not just see our writings as anthropological studies about, or ethnographic studies. And I think this is what one of our key writers today, Historian Kire, keeps harping on. She's not only an award winner or winner of several awards, but she's written some wonderful poetry and works. I'll be talking and naming some of them later on. This idea that whatever we write has to be either about the conflict and politics, insurgency, militancy of the Northeast. We have more than that to tell. Sure, this has been so much part of our recent history, the tragedy and the burden. It is there. And this has generated so much writing. But we also have other things. When we write about ourselves and our way of life, or the way of life of our forefathers, or our folk tales and mythologies, and we bring them in or fuse them into the stories or into research articles or whatever, often this is seen by other scholars, or let us say, scholars elsewhere often tend to look at these things as a kind of ethnographical study about us. They don't, we want people to see the talent behind, the kind of quality and talent, because at the end of the day, I think it was Ishiguro when he accepted his Nobel Prize for Literature in 2017, he had said that yes, writing and writing fiction, or composing your own creative writing per se, yes, it brings out creativity from all of us. Some writers write with a purpose, they have some objectives, they have things to say. But at the end of the day, such writings are to show that we are like you and you are like us, no matter which part of the globe we are located in. And I think this is what binds us, not only as a region, but it makes us on par. We are on par. It doesn't make us less just because we began writing or just because we were literate a little over 100 years back. I'll be talking about that because Northeast region is a very complex region, and how our script came into each state, I'll just touch on that so that we understand the disparity even amongst us, the disparity of time and space. When was it that some of us got our script, and yet we have now flown into this, flowed, I would say, we are now flowing into this river, shall I say, to use a metaphor, of writings that are coming out so richly from this region. Now, but to just get back to DRS 1, because we have to talk about the achievements. 5 years we were funded, and over here I just want to mention one thing before I move into the achievements. We have to make mention of Professor Zohnahthlak, who was our previous Vice Chancellor and who left us in 2017, left us, meaning left the university. Had it not been for him and his support, we would not have finished the 5 years. You see, UGC, the fund flowed for about 2 years regularly, but from the 3rd, 4th, 5th year, we had to keep borrowing from the university funds. So on this trust basis and the fact that the Vice Chancellor saw our performance and that funds were being utilized well, he used to give us the advance, which later on, much later on, UGC gave back to the university. Then also I would mention Professor A.N. Rai, who was the Vice Chancellor prior to Professor Zohnahthlak. He was actually the one who encouraged and pushed and initiated. And he asked the department, incidentally I was head of department at that time in those days, so he asked in very short time to prepare the research proposal and to go to Delhi and so on and so forth. And the first attempt failed, where I had gone with another reader who is no longer working with us, Dr. Sivashish Biswas. Our first presentation at UGC did not bear fruit, but we did not give up, and the second time in 2010 we again proposed the same project, and this time our younger colleagues, now Professor Margaret Ch and Dr. Sharila Minziri Changte, they went to Delhi, and it was thanks to them that we got this project going. So that is the background and the history of this. Now, just to very briefly talk about the future trust, just to repeat, when we are talking about emerging literatures from this region, it is about documentation, it is about translation, and it is about publication of research. and also translation of emerging literatures. Then research by the scholars in the identified areas, and also the introduction of courses, certain key courses. I'll mention two. See, narratives of Northeast India. We have been the first university and the first department to actually have such a course. In fact, way back when Mizoram University was born, then the first revision of our course took place in 2003, and then the following 2004-05. And that was when we had this core course, one of the core courses, which was called Tribal Literature and Translation. And over there we had already introduced a bit of writing from Northeast. But to be very honest, things were still, the corpus of writings from Northeast was still very minimal then. And we did not have access to them as well because of lack of translation and so on. But we had it in that course. However, in 2008, we introduced a very important course. As I said, in fact, we spearheaded this very important, in fact, I would say, in a way, movement for highlighting and facilitating studies for writings from Northeast. In 2008, we introduced our narratives from Northeast, because by then we had poems, we had short stories, we had novels from the Northeast, and we were able to bring in and develop a very rich course. And that in fact had become a model for many of our sister universities in the Northeast region. And of late, we have also introduced translation studies. And both of these courses are taught in the PG fourth semester. So we are doing things in a practical manner, not only doing our own individual research, but actually disseminating. And that is the important thing, disseminating to our research scholars and disseminating this awareness and keenness for literatures from the Northeast. Now, over here, very briefly, now I'm moving on to the achievements as it were, but this is very briefly done, and I will just mention them. Noteworthy achievements made by our department as a result of that DRS I. We have generated MPhil and PhD research works so much today. Several of our MPhil scholars and several of our PhD scholars have worked and got their degrees, research degrees, and several of them continue to work today in different areas which people would not have thought was possible. And I think this is so important because it has been, these kind of works have been, is now being useful. Many of them are in the process of being published as well. Then, so we have generated publication, research publications, as I said, not only through these research works, but also of the teachers themselves, of the teachers ourselves, generating research publications in books and articles, and from our research scholars as well, and this is going on. It's an ongoing process. Then also, we keep organizing our annual regional or seminars, workshops, conferences, both at the national and also international level. And this is the way we are able to bring in scholars from across the country and sometimes from abroad, and also highlighting the writings, in the process highlighting the writings from this region. Now, as I said, we have included these courses, the two that I have mentioned, which is so important. And then translation works. I want to mention this separately. Translation works which is so important. In fact, let me just say, like, put it this way, it's an ongoing process, and one of the most recent that we have done is, because so many translations of folk tales have been going on for quite some time, not only by us, but also by different scholars and, some of our colleagues in the Department of Mizo, they have done it much before. But under Katha and Katha publications, and many of you all may know the name of Gita Dhamarajan. We were part of, at least some of us teachers were part of what is still called Northeast Writers Forum. And she worked out the project for us, wherein we were to produce some 5 to 6 volumes. And I was language coordinator for one of the volumes, in fact the first that came out in 2005. It was called Heart of the Matter. Now this book is still selling like hotcakes because it contains short stories from across the region, from Meghalaya, from Manipur, from Nagaland, from Mizoram, from Assam. And this has been taken on as text or as research material ever since. This is what I want to say. That's part of our contribution. The other, and I was language coordinator for that. Now the other volume in which we were involved, meaning Mizoram, was called Fresh Fictions, again under Katha, which was published the next year. That is, Heart of the Matter was 2004 and Fresh Fictions was 2005. So over there also there were components from Mizo. See, in Heart of the Matter, names like Kaplaya, Si Tuam Luaya, Kesi Lalvunga, Vane Kluama, whom people never heard of and could not read their works, had been translated. There are 5 short stories there. And in Fresh Fictions, there are a couple of folk tales, and also James Daukuma was introduced there through his novella Silai Mungai Om, which was translated as The Beloved Bullet. So all this had been initiated from our department by us. And I think it's only fair that we should mention these things, because these, thanks to Gita, thanks to Katha, we had been able to bring out materials for study, not only for research, but for study both in college and at the university level. And mind you, not only in Mizoram, but elsewhere. Now, that is about the translation studies I wanted to, translation works that we have done and our contribution. And also, I want to talk about, under DRS SAP, one of our very important achievements was the publication of an annual journal which has now become a biannual journal. It is called MZU Journal of Literature and Cultural Studies. And incidentally, it is not only biannual, it is now UGC enlisted journal. And it comes out in June and in December, and frankly, we have more than our share of submissions or publications. So we are very happy. This is still going on, it's continuing. And it is taking care of itself. The cost of publication is taken care of by the subscription. So the department has been doing this. Now, with regard to the projections for our next 5 years, that is under DRS SAP II, I just want to talk briefly before we move into this script culture and writing culture, which is so important for the DRS II. as I said, I'll just mention again the title of our research project. It is called Situating the Mizo / Zohnahthlak in Mizoram and Manipur, and it is a study of the historical and socio-cultural processes of emergent identities from orality to writing. Now over here, I'll just mention briefly 4 objectives, what we are planning to do and what we are already starting. We have to trace the different historical processes of transition from orality to script, the historical processes that took place, how, who brought in the script, and so on and so forth. So from script, and then from script to print culture, and this is how education and modernization of the tribal groups took place here in the region. So that is one. 2 is to provide necessary theory praxis aspect, meaning that we have to go, because we are going to talk about politics of identity, for example, and the power equations involved in politics of identity. And just now I also spoke about, politics of interpreting cultures and, works, texts and so on. So these would be based on post-colonial theorists, and it will be explored. We are going to explore it through that. That is the second objective, or the process which we are going to use. And thirdly, of course, the ever important component of translation and publication. This is so important. And in fact, we are hopeful that during this second phase, more of this will come out. And this translation and publication of various key texts from the source language into English. So whether it would be from MARG, or from Paite, or from Mizo, or maybe from Mara and Lai also, because they are very much included. What are the key texts in these source languages, and how many of them can we take up for translation into English? Because the rest of the world has to read it. This is the way we see it. We expose it for others to read. In other words, things that come out from us would be hopefully, the more genuine article, as it were. Then, of course, comes the organization of seminars and workshops on the thrust areas, which will help to achieve our proposal. So, this basically is about, very, very briefly, about DRS 1 and, of course, what we are projecting for DRS 2. Now, without going too much into the nitty-gritty, I want to talk about related issues that come in even as we talk about these 2 projects, which are both in continuum. And here, if you will excuse me, I will just look at some of my points, because there are so many things I wish to say, and it should come sequentially so that it does not confuse the listeners. Let's put things in perspective. I won't go too much into the details of Northeast region, its diversity, and diversity not only in the kind of people, but also in our language and in our culture. There's so many things to talk about, so we won't go into that, but to help to situate the topic that I had begun with, the Northeast region itself, which we have to live with now, it's actually a colonial construct. We did not construct this region. it was a colonial construct by the British, and it was seen as a frontier beyond the Bengal frontier, as it were, and they saw the need to colonize this region. So it was called the northeast frontier, as it were. And you see, if we look into history, though I'm not a historian, I hope I'll get my dates correct, but from the readings that I have done, in the year 1926, that was the year that the British came into Assam. Prior to this 19th century, this region never existed as part of any political state system. That is why I am saying that, that is why I am saying that the northeast region as we know it today is really a colonial construct which the Indian Union inherited at the time of independence, and this is how it has continued. Because prior to 1926, this region was really under no political state system, as it were. We know that Manipur and Tripura, for example, were princely states. It was in 1948 that they became states and no longer the princely states that they were. So just to give an example. Now, all of this while the rest of India, mainland, we can say, was existing as part of what we call the mainland or the mainstream. So when we talk about mainstream literature also, we actually mean and refer to, let's say, the Sanskritic traditions that goes back to over maybe 4,000 to 5,000 years. And then what about us in this region? So that is the point I'm trying to come to. This is not a comparative or evaluative study, but it's to put things in perspective. The kind of centuries old culture in literacy, in the ancient literary traditions that goes back to 3,000 years, 5,000 years, maybe even longer. Now, literacy came to these tribal hills, as it were, to our hills, at different points in time in the 19th century. And speaking of the hilly regions in particular, these were through the Christian missionaries that had come at different points in time to our hills. So let me put it this way, with their arrival also, we got our scripts. But this was at different points in time in the 19th century. It was not the same. And apart from giving us script, that is the Roman script, you usher in the education and literacy first and then education, and of course a new religion to replace our indigenous faith systems. So we all know about this, so we don't have to go too much into detail about that. But you see, it's very important when we talk about our when we are talking about our process, from the process that historical processes of transition from orality to script, and script to the print culture under the DRS II. So here, our stories are similar, but our stories differ. When we talk about, let's take the Khasi and Garo conversion to Christianity, which dates back to 1813 for the Khasis and 1863 for the Garos, respectively. I just want to mention the source from which I got these things. I had published this some time back, and I have my notes here, so just bear with me. The first first two Khasis, the first two Khasi and Garo converts to Christianity date to 1813 and 1863 respectively, and the replacement of the Bengali script that they had used, because the literate elite, so to say, the Rajas and their scripters and their messengers, they were using the Bengali script. Because of the movement of peoples, geographically you can actually locate, so that was there. But this was replaced by the Roman script in 1841 for the Khasis and 1890s for the Garos. So much earlier than us Mizos, for example. And my source was Hamlet Barre from his book The Language and Literature of Meghalaya, and this was published by Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, 1977. I was UGC associate there at the Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. So I had access to several wonderful books on the Northeast, and I did a lot of research at that time. Now, that is one. Now, what about Nagaland? In Nagaland, the first missionary, his name was Miles Bronson. He came in 1839. While the different Naga dialects were given their Roman script in the Gospel translations that took place from 1872 onwards. So this was how they got their script. So the first Christian missionary entry in Nagaland was 1839, and the different Naga dialects got their script, that is the Roman script, through Gospel translations from 1872 onwards. So it was always the Bible translations or Christian literature that got in first. Now, what about the Mizos? As we know, Mizos, our first missionaries came in 1894, and they gave us the Roman script the same year, and also biblical translation, as we know, of Gospel of Luke and St. John and St. Luke, and also parts of Acts of the Apostles. So this was the way we got our Roman script, and also the way we saw writing. Now, it's very interesting. I'm mentioning very little of Arunachal Pradesh because my source here has been also, some of our professor friends there, as well as some writer friends that I have. The first Nishi man to embrace Christianity in Arunachal, he was baptized in 1920. So think of it. Much later, 1920, and the first church inside Arunachal Pradesh, that is erstwhile Nifa, that is Northeast Frontier Agency, it used to be Nifa. So this was the Baptist church at Talo village. I'm just mentioning this because the source for this particular information is Neelam Taram, a glimpse into Baptist churches in Arunachal, Itanagar, 2001. Now over here, since we are on the Northeast in general, first of all, one very interesting thing I want to say is, yes, I'll talk about Assam and Manipur first, and also it would be in a way Tripura in connection. Assam and Manipur, the Assamese script, originally it was called a Kamarupi script. It was founded in copper plates, epigraphic writings, copper plates of King Bhaskara Varman, dating the date is 601 AD. And in fact, this so you see they had their script such a long time back. And the Meiteis, they discovered that they had a script. This was in the much later, but they had got their script. They already had a script in the 8th century. In inscriptions found in 10 bronze coins, and it was issued by their king at that time. His name was King Kong Tek Cha, and this was around the year 763 and so on. So you see, I'm putting things in perspective to show that within Northeast itself, the manner in which we got our script and thereby our literacy and thereby our education, followed by the print culture, was at different points in time, and in the case of Manipur and Assam, it was so much more earlier, centuries earlier than those living in the hills. This is one thing I wanted to emphasize. And since we are talking about scripts, I just want to mention something that I had got information, and I had sourced this from Professor Tamo Mibang of Arunachal Pradesh, who incidentally was Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University at some point. I think now his term is over. This is so interesting, so I want to share it. The Monpas of the Bodic language group have their own script, that is the Tibetan script. They are very much part of Arunachal there, the population there, and the Bodic language group, they have their own script, that is the Tibetan script, and the Khamtis also have a Thai Khamti script known as Lik Thai. These scripts are regarded as sacred and confined to the religious and ritualistic sphere, being preserved in religious texts only. So we may think, if they have their script, shouldn't they be writing in these scripts? But these were actually considered meant only for religious texts, because they were it was considered to be as a religious script, sacred script. So I wanted to share that. Now, to come back, putting things in perspective, coming back to our topic, that is talking in general about literatures of the Northeast region, I had mentioned earlier, now it is so clear, it reveals that there are two very, very clear traditions, or shall we say literary or major traditions, and this has been pointed out by several scholars. Professor Tilottama has pointed this out in her writings also. These two major influences are, one is the mainstream, as I said, Indian literature, the Sanskritic that I had mentioned, which mainly influenced the Assam, Tripura, Manipur region, okay? And they are associated with this. But this in no way denotes that Assam or Tripura or Manipur did not have their, that they did not have their local cultural identity, no. It is very much there, and it is reflected in their writings. But these three states in particular were definitely influenced by what we are talking about just now, the mainstream Indian literary tradition. These are the regions because they have had a long history of the influence of Hinduism in their region, and it got ingrained into their lifestyle, the ethos and literature that they produce, understandably so. So it's different. And in fact, I would go further and say that the main waves of cultural invasion, as pointed out by Tilottama in her introduction to her 2 volumes published by OUT on writings from Northeast, in fact she called them anthology. So she has brought in 2 very good anthologies where she has written this very, very informative, what shall we say, article for us others to read. And over here, what were the main waves of cultural influence that wrought changes were the Bhakti movement in Assam, and this would be around the 15th century approximate, the Bhakti movement. Vaishnavism in Manipur, a little later, around the 16th century, and they still retain part of their pre-Hindu beliefs and customs. Till today, they are still retaining that not only the Hindu, cultural influence, but the pre-Hindu beliefs and customs as well. So this is one thing I want to put as part of the perspective you should know. Now the other one, the other influence, literary influence is the so-called tribal Christian literary influence. Now we have seen how the script came, so now things fall into place. We can see that the influence here is called, we can call it the tribal Christian literary influence, let's call it that, and in fact a very Christian influence. And this is particular to Nagaland, to Meghalaya and to Mizoram, very much so. And Arunachal Pradesh does not show a marked Hindu nor Christian influence as such, like the rest of us that I have mentioned. So I have kept Arunachal Pradesh a little out of this because I have not had material to go too much into research on this area of Arunachal Pradesh. But I think we can safely say, when we look at how late the first Christian convert took place. So now, one of the main recurrent features of the literatures of the Northeast, mind you, is the intensive sense awareness of cultural loss. This is something you will see in the poems, and mind you, I'm talking about writings in English, not translations, writings in English from writers of the Northeast. And this would include the genres of poetry, prose, fiction, and this intense sense of loss of culture and the attempts, the desire and the attempts to recover this loss. This is one of the very prominent features I want to mention. The other, of course, which stands out very clearly in many of the writings of our key writers from the region is, as I said, the conflict of the region, the political conflict and the ensuing tragedy and sufferings of the common man. This also is one of the key features. Some people call the poems, too harsh or too much generated by violence and the gun culture and so on. But it's a reality that people are living with here. So we cannot sideline this as well. Now, to come back to that sense of cultural loss, obviously in today's world, and the very idea of assimilation is so frightening for many of the smaller tribal communities. So the effort to recover this kind of a cultural loss in some way or other through the writings becomes very important. This is one of the important voices that keep coming out. This, we can say, comes with the negotiation with other cultures. Yes, because other cultures, or shall we say, even what we would say the more dominant cultures. In the case of the hills, it was the dominant culture of Christianity or of the Western world, and in the case of the other regions like Assam and so on, it was the mainstream dominant culture. So you see that we had to negotiate. There was this negotiation with the other cultures, and particularly with the more dominant cultures. So not only from within our borders, but from beyond the borders. So how is this done, this negotiation? Often it is done when each small community or linguistic group responds through its oral or written word, something that I had mentioned earlier in our objective. Linguistic group responds through its oral or the written word. So hence, the emerging literature, as we keep saying. And to the encounters with the dominant cultures, where each of these encounters resulted in different forms of resistance, as well as appropriations and absorptions. Now, this, in fact, I would say is the core of our DRS II objective. So I'll just mention it again. This negotiation with other cultures, particularly with dominant cultures, and our fear of that cultural loss, because for many of us it had been lost for a while, as it were. So the process of recovery is still going on. So people want to hold on to that aspect as well. Now this negotiation, how does it happen? Like, we are a smaller community or linguistic group, and we respond through oral or the written word to this encounter with the more dominant cultures. And each of these encounters results in different forms of resistance as well as appropriation and absorption. Because this is the way for adapting, where we have to also absorb and we also have to, in many ways, appropriate. Like, look at the English language itself. Why is it that such good writings in English, not translations, mind you, in English, writers writing in English from the Northeast, why is it happening? I wouldn't know if it is more so than the rest of India. Surely not, because our population and our number is so much less. But the kind of good writing that is coming out in English originally, being written in English originally, is the English education that had been established by the missionaries. So many of our writers have had that privilege of being educated and studying in these kind of educational systems, and hence the mastery of the language. So talking about appropriations, I would even say it is not only absorption but appropriating the language of the other, as it were, and using it with as much effect as using one's own vernacular. So many of our writers are bilingual, many of them are multilingual. In the case of Arunachal, for example, it wasn't English or the influence of the Christian missionaries. People like Lumaradai, he is no more, he is the uncle of Mamangdai. For example, I'll just quote his name, and others also, Yeshidorji. They have written in Assamese. They write in Assamese, and that is translated into English. Now, why is that? That's because Assamese language was the dominant culture that they were negotiating with. So, in writing in that language was, in a way, maybe a convenience, and it was good. So in that way, it is not a negative thing when we talk about this negotiation and encounters. Now, since script and literacy, it precedes the formation of a literary tradition, I am trying to situate the diversity of its history with the different communities of the region. So, though there is much more to be said here, the mind-boggling linguistic varieties that we have, that exist in the states, this is something I just want to briefly touch on again. The linguistic varieties. Because this becomes so important when we talk about the processes from orality to script to print culture. If you look at the kind of linguistic variety that is in use, that is still being actively used in the region, is surprising. And I will take just about two examples. Nagaland and Arunachal, for example, they would be seen as prime examples here. In Arunachal Pradesh, we are told, according to their statistics, there are 24 major tribes. And these are further divided into 100 sub-tribes and more. And all of them have their own linguistic variants or dialects. So you can imagine the variety maybe of their stories as well. In Nagaland, you have 16 major tribes and several sub-tribes, again each with their own linguistic variants or with their own languages, as it were. And if you look at Meghalaya alone also includes about 20 ethnic groups in its list of scheduled tribes. So, and this is further broken into more sub-tribes and clans, and each of them speaking again, as I said, in their language, in their dialect. The language variant is so much. And we know that most of the tribal languages in the northeast region are of the Tibeto-Burman language group, of the hill tribes in particular. But the Khasi dialect, of course, differs a little. It is an offshoot of the Mon-Khmer linguistic group of Austro-Asiatic language family. Now, as I said, many of the writers of the Northeast, they have been schooled in missionary-run English medium schools. They write in English. Some are bilingual, some are multilingual. And of course, you have such wonderful writers writing in the vernacular languages. So we need to have translations. That cannot be emphasized enough. So here, as a kind of summing up, we can say that writings from Northeast India reflect on issues of identity construct, on hidden colonial burdens that refuse to leave, and on the key role that oral traditions continue to play. I'll just repeat these 3 points because these are some of the findings that other scholars may have found also, but particularly during the process of our projects, these have been reiterated again and again in our findings. That is, writings from Northeast India, they reflect on the issues of identity construct. Very powerful political constructs. And then the hidden colonial burdens that refuse to leave. With us Mizos, there's so much that we can talk about here. Although we are now quite nostalgic and moving towards the process of cultural revival and cultural recovery and so on. But we have to admit that there are maybe not very obvious but hidden colonial burdens. It has refused to leave us. And this is in fact reflected in many of the writings of our writers from this state. And then thirdly, the key role that oral traditions continue to play. For those of us in the hills here, we cannot sideline the importance of this, the key role that oral traditions continue to play, because this is part of our identity formation, this is part of what has made us, our past. So these are my concluding comments about literature from Northeast, that I have, in fact, I'll read this quotation. It's a quote that I have taken from Introduction to Dancing Earth, anthology of poetry from Northeast by Kinfam Singh Nong Kendri and Robin S. Gongom, 2009. What they say is, literatures from Northeast, it is a celebration of life in all its unpredictable variety. Despite all its inherent contradictions, there is no doubt of the uneasy coexistence of paradoxical worlds such as the folk and the westernized, virgin forests and car-choked streets, ethnic cleansers and parasites of democracy, ancestral values and flagrant corruption, resurgent nativism and the sensitive outsider's predicament. End of quote. This, in a way, in a nutshell, brings together, I would say, what the writings coming out from Northeast is all about. And it cannot be just seen as mere material or food or fodder for study of our history or study of our way of life as anthropological for anthropologists or ethnographers. No, it goes beyond. And this is what I want to emphasize in my talk today. Now, as the real part of my real conclusion, I would say, I've taken up a lot of time. I want to mention some of the names. It would be unfair, to not mention names. Now, I cannot mention the names of all the writers, poets from the Northeast, but I'll just mention some of the key names that I feel are important for study and research, and those with which we are quite familiar and whose works are actually available, published and available. And mind you, published by publishing houses, reputed publishing houses such as Penguin, then Zuban Penguin, Aleph, so many of them, we will see that. Now, let's take Nagaland for example. I think most of us have heard of Temsula Au, and amongst her first publications we have, Songs That Say. She had the Writers' Workshop publish her collection of poems, Songs That Say. This was way back in 1988, and we have the collections here. And then there's another small volume, Songs That Try to Say. This was published in 1992. But why I'm mentioning her is I'll name the work which most of you all might have read and heard of. It is published by Zuban Penguin, These Hills Called Home, Stories from a War Zone. These are, short stories, collection of short stories that run the gamut of the trauma, suffering, the complexities of the Naga struggle for independence and the sufferings of the common people, of the common man. And as she says in her introduction, at the end of the day, it is not the army or the underground army who are the losers or the sufferers. The key sufferers are really the women and the children. And here, her latest, actually, she wrote her memoir also, Once Upon a Life is her memoir, and after that she published a work called Our Senla's Story, published in 2017 by Zuban. This is, I would say, unless she has published another novel, this would be, her latest novel. And of course, her latest collection of poems, which was published by Heritage Nagaland in 2017, was Songs Along the Way Home. So she is a poet. She doesn't leave that first love of hers, but she is also such a good storyteller. This is Temsula Au, who has also been awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2015. Now I want to talk about from Nagaland, Easterine Kire, because she also holds the distinction of being the first Naga writer to write a novel in English. And this was called A Naga Village Remembered, and this was way back in 2003. It was so important, you know, for me to put things in context, as I said, because when you talk about when other states or say in mainstream India, the script or the literary traditions, 1,000 years old and so on, and then we getting our script just over 120, 30 years back. And then here you come up with these award-winning works. And here, Naga Village Remembered was published in 2003. Her other novel, When the River Sleeps, which she published in 2014. She's published several really good novels, Easterine Kire. But I'm mentioning only some works because, for example, When the River Sleeps, published in 2014, had won the Hindu Prize for Fiction in 2015. So I felt that I should. And then Sons of the Thundercloud in 2016, Sahitya had recognized it, Son of the Thundercloud 2016. And she has a very recent novel that was published this year, 2019. It is called A Respectable Woman. And this has been published by Zama. I think we should be purchasing this. If not already done, we should be purchasing these for our library here as well. Now, other well-known, widely published poets are people like Mona Lisa Chamkija. She also happens to be the owner and editor of Nagaland Page. Nini Lungalang, they write very personal poems, hard-hitting, in English. And there's a young upcoming voice, because I have met her personally also, I wanted to mention her, Avinyo Kire. She has written The Power to Forgive and Other Stories. This was published in 2015. The Power to Forgive and Other Stories. This again is a real good collection of short stories by this very young writer. Now about Arunachal Pradesh, I'll mention Mamang Dai only, although because she's the prominent name who is writing in English. And she writes so well, she has published so many poems, river poems, she's a journalist, but her first work of fiction, shall we say, was published in 2006. It was called The Legends of Pensum, and this was published by Penguin. We have been using this as a text also, and this actually really catapulted her into prominence. And then she also won the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2017 for her novel called The Black Hill. The Black Hill. It's a wonderful historical novel, at least I call it that, but it is so much more. I shouldn't just label it as a historical novel, but it's a good work of fiction, and she received the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2017 for this. Now in Meghalaya there are many writers, many names that we can talk about, but the first names that come to mind are the poets, the Shillong poets they are called, and people like Desmond Karmofrong, people like Kinfam Singh Nongkinri, Esther Siam, and many more. But I will mention also Robin Singh Ngungmong. Although he is by birth from Manipur, he is a Manipuri, but he has lived, settled, and he is working in the University of Nehru in Shillong. So he is very much part of that so-called core Shillong poets, I think they are called, and so he's very much part of that, and he has also translated so many wonderful poems from Manipur into English for us to read. And by the way, Robin and Kin Pham, they have contributed so much to bring poetry from Northeast into prominence for, other people to read beyond our borders, rest of the world as it were. They came up with 2 anthologies. One was way back in 2003, it was called Contemporary Anthology of Contemporary Poetry from the Northeast. It's a collection of several poems from the different states, and also Dancing Earth, again another collection that was published in 2009. So that is Meghalaya, but we have not finished with Meghalaya. There is one name I have to mention. This is Janice Perya, who is another wonderful writer, I would say. In 2012, Random House had published a work called Boats on Land. It's a collection of short stories, and this incidentally won her the Sahitya Akademi Young Writers Award, what is called the Yuva Puraskar. Her latest novel, she's written other novels, and her meaning she wrote The Seahorse after that, and now The Nine-Chambered Heart, which was published in 2018, published by Fourth Estate. This is actually an imprint of HarperCollins. So this also won the Crossword Award for Fiction, or she won the Crossword Book Award for Fiction in 2013. Now with Mizoram, for writers who are writing in English, the first name I would like to mention is Malsawmy Jacob. She's a widely published poet and writer, and she has the distinction of being the first Mizo writer to write and publish a novel in English. And this book is called Zohrahthlak, which was published in 2015. Mind you, Easterin Kire had already published the first Naga novel in English in 2003. So there's a gap of several years here before we got into the act. Now, prior to this, as I said, she has published several poems, in little slim volumes, and her latest is called Four Gardens and Other Poems, which she published in 2017. There's something quite interesting about writers from Mizoram who are writing in English. They are still very few, but they are very promising. One of them happens to be Tharatlao. One day this book came through the post, and I opened it. It was from the writer himself. It was a novel called Diamante, published in 2015, and which we have published for this library as well. It was published by Partridge India. It's a really good book. And then we have Susan Sangi. I want to mention this young writer. She had, in fact, way back in 2013, and we also have purchased that book, which she wrote. It was a novel called Facebook Phantom in 2013, and it was published by Duckbill Books and classed under the genre of young adult fiction. And I read in India Today some time back where she had said that she would be writing another book after this, to be like a sequel kind of thing, but I have not had access to that book. I don't know if she has published it. So then we also have another promising young writer. Her name is Hannah Lalpui, who incidentally happens to be a research scholar from our department. She recently published her first novel this year, 2019, called When Blackbirds Fly. She wrote it against the backdrop of the Mizoram Rambuai, that is during the troubled times, as it were, of the 1966 MNF uprising. So then, in the genre of poetry, we have a few established names which we cannot but mention. And this is Mona Zote. Then we have Sheri El Changte, Lalrin Moi Kiangte. I'll just mention these three names. They have been published, they are being studied, they're being prescribed. But there is also a crop of upcoming talented young poets who are writing in English and also performing their poems in English through Facebook and so on and so forth. So I think we have writing in English by creative writers has a bright future, I hope. We may not necessarily be able to catch up as of now with the rest of our sister states. As for Assam, I won't even begin to talk about it. They have so many talented writers, and as I said, they have a long literary tradition already. But still, I may mention some names because these are the people that are being read in contemporary times, and we have their books here, their books are selling, they are still writing, they continue to write. Siddhartha Dev, Dhruba Hazarika, Mitra Fukan, Tilotoma Mishra, Ankush Sahitya. Actually, Ankush Sahitya, he is from Shillong, but then he is also from Assam, so I put him here under Assam. And before I close my talk, I just want to reiterate the importance of translation works, and also that I had mentioned the key role, I would say, that this department and the teachers of this department way back under Katha had played that role. So with the publication of Heart of the Matter in 2004 and Fresh Fiction 2005, I would say that we opened to the rest of the world, the kind of talented writers that we had who have been writing in Mizo, and this translation work needs to continue. With this, I will end my talk, but what I just want to say as a last word is, writings, both fiction and non-fiction works, both English and translated works, writings that are emanating and coming out and being published from the Northeast region are really worth reading. They're really worth reading. This is one thing that I want to reiterate before I close this talk. Thank you so much.